What could make a lone Montana rancher risk his life for a woman clutching a worn leather pouch in the middle of a deadly blizzard? Snow exploded beneath the horse's hooves as Dawson Clay threw himself from the saddle. A sharp crack echoed through the pines. Beneath an overturned carriage, a gloved hand still gripped a small leather pouch while icy wind howled through the shattered wheel. Why would someone leave her there? Share your thought as the story begins. Montana Territory lay buried beneath winter in January of 1883. Snow swept down from the Bridger Range with the patience of something that knew it would outlast every fence, every trail, and every man who dared cross it. The wind bent the pine branches until they groaned like old wagon wheels, then scattered powder across the valley until earth and sky became the same endless white. Dawson Clay leaned forward in the saddle, one gloved hand steady on the reins while the other held his coat closed against the cold. Behind him, strapped securely in a leather satchel, were empty medicine bottles and folded receipts from the Vale Ranch, 12 miles east. Mrs. Vale's youngest grandson had survived another bout of pneumonia. Dawson never considered himself a doctor, but years as a Union Army medic had taught him enough to help when no one else could reach these scattered ranches before a storm. His horse, Buck, lowered his head against the wind and picked each careful step through snow already deep enough to hide the wagon ruts. "We're close," Dawson murmured. "Just a little farther." The words were meant more for himself than the horse. Clay Ranch waited beyond the next ridge, with its smoke-black chimney, stacked firewood, and one lonely lamp hanging beside the front door. No wife waited there. No children raced across the yard. The house answered only to the crackle of its own fireplace, and the sound of Dawson's boots crossing the floor each evening. That had been enough for a long time. The daylight faded faster than he liked. Winter afternoons in Montana had a habit of surrendering without warning. One moment the snow reflected silver light. The next, shadows swallowed everything. Buck suddenly slowed, his ears lifted. Then he stopped altogether. Dawson frowned. "What is it?" The horse snorted sharply toward a stand of pines several yards off the trail. At first, Dawson saw nothing except drifting snow. Then something flashed beneath the branches. Metal. He swung out of the saddle, boots sinking nearly to his knees. The wind pushed against him as he walked toward the trees. An overturned carriage rested half-buried beneath fresh snow. One wheel had shattered. Canvas flapped wildly where the storm had torn it open. The horses were gone. Dawson stepped closer, expecting to find nothing but frozen baggage. Instead, he noticed the axle. He crouched low, brushing away snow with his glove. The axle pin wasn't broken. It had been removed. The iron piece lay several feet away, clean, whole, and marked with fresh scratches from a tool. His jaw tightened. Carriages did not come apart like that by chance. A shape near the ditch caught his eye. The driver. The older man had managed to crawl several yards from the wreck before collapsing. Snow had gathered across his shoulders, softening the stillness that no winter could change. Dawson removed his hat for one silent moment. "I'm sorry." The wind carried the words away. Then another sound reached him. Not a voice, not exactly. More like the faintest breath beneath the broken canvas. He hurried to the carriage. Inside, wrapped awkwardly against splintered boards, lay a young black woman. Frost covered loose strands of dark hair, escaping beneath a fur-lined hood. Her gown, though soaked and torn, had once been beautifully made, stitched with silver embroidery no ranch woman in Montana would ever wear on an ordinary journey. One gloved hand clutched a small leather pouch so tightly her fingers refused to loosen. Dawson pressed 2 fingers gently against her neck. Nothing. Then a pulse. Weak, unsteady, still there. For one terrible heartbeat, another face flashed before him. A young soldier, his younger brother. Blood freezing on the battlefield while Dawson fought through smoke that never cleared quickly enough. He closed his eyes once. Not again. Without another thought, he stripped off his heavy leather coat and wrapped it around the unconscious woman. She weighed almost nothing as he lifted her from the wreck. Too light, far too light, as though another hard gust might steal her away before he reached the horse. Buck stood perfectly still while Dawson settled her carefully across the saddle in front of him. The woman's head rested against his chest. Her breathing barely stirred the fabric beneath his shirt. He turned the horse toward home. Behind them, the snow erased every hoofprint within moments. By the time Clay Ranch appeared through the storm, dusk had swallowed the valley. Dawson pushed open the cabin door with his shoulder. Warm air rushed out. He carried her straight to the chair nearest the stone fireplace. Fresh logs disappeared into the flames until the room slowly filled with light again. Working carefully, he removed only the frozen outer garments that had trapped the cold against her body. Her scarf bore neatly embroidered initials, TR. He folded every piece of clothing beside the bed where she would see it later. The leather pouch remained untouched. He laid it beside her pillow exactly where her searching hand might find it. From an old wooden cabinet, he retrieved the medical kit he had carried home after the war. Bandages, needles, salve, a bottle of whiskey. He cleaned the deep cut across her ankle with practiced hands. Outside, the storm beat against the shutters. Inside, only the fire answered him. Hours passed. Near midnight, she stirred. Her lips moved. "Father." The word barely rose above the crackling fire. One trembling hand reached into empty air before falling back against the blanket. Dawson pulled his chair closer. He added another log to the fire and watched the steady rise and fall of her breathing. The house no longer sounded empty. It sounded like someone was fighting to stay alive. Long after midnight, unable to sleep, Dawson reached into his coat pocket and placed the iron axle pin on the table. The firelight revealed narrow tool marks cut into its surface. He stared at them for a long time. The carriage had not failed. Someone had wanted Talia Reed to disappear beneath the Montana snow. By morning, the storm had settled into a low gray hush. Snow pressed against the windows, and the road beyond Clay Ranch had vanished beneath drifts nearly as high as the lower fence rails. Talia woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For a moment she did not move. Her eyes traveled from the rough-hewn ceiling to the stone hearth, then to the folded gown beside the bed. The leather pouch rested within reach, untouched. Dawson stood near the stove with his back to her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. When he heard the blanket shift, he turned, but did not come closer. "How long?" she asked. "Since yesterday afternoon." Her hand closed around the pouch. "You opened it?" "No." "Why not?" Dawson set the coffee down. "It wasn't mine." She watched him carefully. Men had said kind things to her before. Most kindness had carried a hook hidden beneath it. This man only moved the cup to the edge of the table and stepped away. "Water's warm," he said. "Soup too if you can keep it down." Talia tried to rise. Pain shot through her ankle, and the room tilted. Dawson reached her before she fell, one hand at her elbow, the other steadying her shoulder. The moment she found her balance, he let go. No lingering touch, no claim. He pulled a wooden stool beside the table. "If you're set on being up, sit there." She almost smiled. Almost. The next few days found a shape of their own. Dawson rose before daylight. Talia heard the barn door groan, the chop of an axe, the crack of ice breaking in the water trough. By the time he came inside, snow clung to his beard and shoulders. He used one plate, one cup, one chair angled toward the door. Talia noticed everything. Dawson noticed things too. She folded her blanket each morning. She rinsed her cup before he asked. She watched the windows whenever the wind rose, and she never sat with her back to an entrance. On the fourth day, she found a sour smell coming from the grain barrel. "This feed's turning," she said. Dawson lifted a handful and examined it. "Mold near the bottom. If your mare eats it, she'll founder or worse. He carried the barrel outside without argument. Later that afternoon, the same mare caught her leg against a loose stall hinge. Talia knelt in the straw and cleaned the cut while Dawson held the animal's head. "You've done this before," he said. "I worked as a nurse through St. Agnes Church. People or horses? Mostly people. Horses complain less." A quiet laugh escaped him. It was brief, but it changed his face. That evening, he placed a second mug beside the stove before she entered the room. Talia said nothing. Neither did he. Days passed beneath hard blue skies. The roads remained closed. Snow slid from the barn roof in heavy sheets, and the chimney smoked steadily above the ranch house. Talia began measuring feed, mending torn cloth, and writing Dawson's expenses in a small ledger she found beneath a stack of receipts. "You keep all this in your head?" she asked. "Mostly. That explains the missing $8. He looked over her shoulder. She pointed to a feed receipt. "You paid twice." Dawson studied the paper, then her. "Good thing you stayed long enough to find it." The words landed softly between them. Outside the stable stood an old apple tree, its branches black against the snow. Dawson carried an axe toward it one morning. "What are you doing?" Talia asked. "Cutting dead wood." She crossed the yard carefully, favoring her healing ankle. With her thumbnail, she scratched the bark of a lower branch. A narrow line of green showed beneath. "It isn't dead," she said. "It has only been surviving." Dawson lowered the axe. He did not cut the tree. That night, wind pushed hard against the cabin walls. Talia sat across from Dawson at the table, the leather pouch resting between them. For several minutes, she only looked at it. Then she loosened the tie. Inside lay a folded document bearing a red wax seal. "My father's final will," she said. "Josiah Reed." Dawson remained still. "He died last month. His brother Simon expected everything: the estate, the mills, the livestock, the company shares." She unfolded the paper carefully. "My father left them to me." Dawson's eyes moved to the seal, but not the words. "Simon said a woman had no business controlling that much property. He tried to make me sign it away. When I refused, he locked me in my room and told people grief had made me unstable." Her fingers tightened around the page. "One of the servants helped me escape. I was headed for Helena when Simon's men found the carriage." Dawson looked toward the dark window. "You think the driver was with them?" "I don't know. He may have tried to save me." Silence filled the room. Talia waited for Dawson to tell her she had brought danger beneath his roof. Instead, he said, "You leave when you decide, not when fear decides for you." Her eyes lifted to his. For one unguarded second, the room seemed warmer than the fire could explain. When the road finally opened, Dawson took her to Copper Creek for salt, medicine, and thread. Inside the general store, two men stood near the stove reading a notice from Helena. "Rich family looking for a runaway woman," one said. "Claims she stole legal papers and company money." The other man laughed. "Snow buries names same as bodies." A spool of sky blue thread slipped from Talia's hand and struck the floor. Dawson moved beside her. Not in front. Beside. He paid for the supplies and led her outside. On the ride home, two sets of hoofprints followed their wagon for nearly 3 miles before disappearing into the timber. That night, Dawson found the barn latch cut. Inside the cabin, Talia's leather pouch had been moved from the table to the chair. Nothing was missing. Near a pool of spilled lamp oil lay a burned match. Before dawn, a horse stopped beyond the north fence. A man's voice carried through the dark. "Talia Reed belongs to her family. Send her out, Clay, and this ranch stays standing." Dawson stood beside the front window, rifle lowered but ready. The lamp behind him had been turned down until only a narrow flame remained. Beyond the glass, 4 riders waited near the north fence, their horses shifting through the snow. Talia came from the back room already dressed. Her plain wool skirt brushed the floor, and the leather pouch was tied beneath her coat. "How many?" she asked. "4. Simon's men? Unless you have other family making threats before breakfast." She looked at him. Under different circumstances, the dry answer might have earned a smile. A rider moved closer to the gate. "We have papers." Dawson stepped onto the porch. Cold air cut through his shirt sleeves. "Bring them forward." The leader rode halfway up the lane and held out a folded document. Dawson did not open the gate. He read it through the rails. Simon Reed's name appeared at the bottom. No sheriff's mark, no court seal, no lawful warrant. The rider watched him finish. "Miss Reed is unwell," he said. "She stole property from her guardian. We have authority to return her." "Simon Reed's handwriting isn't authority." The man's face tightened. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Dawson folded the paper and pushed it back through the gate. "Come back with the law." He walked toward the house. Behind him came the soft click of a revolver being drawn. Dawson stopped, but did not turn. "Last chance, Clay." He closed the gate and slid the wooden bar into place. Inside, Talia had opened the cupboard and begun filling a flour sack with food. "You'll use the cellar passage if they come through the house," Dawson said. "No. That passage opens behind the south slope. They won't see you." "And leave you here?" "Yes." Talia tied the sack hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "I am finished being hidden in rooms while men decide what happens to me. I'm trying to keep you alive." So was Simon, according to Simon. The words struck cleanly. Dawson's jaw tightened. "That isn't fair." "No, it isn't. But survival without choice is still a cage." Outside, a horse moved along the west wall. Dawson looked toward the sound, then opened the gun cabinet. He removed a second rifle and held it out. "Can you use this?" Talia checked the chamber before answering. "My father taught me to shoot before he taught me to balance an account book." The riders divided around the ranch. One moved toward the horse pen. Another disappeared behind the barn. For several minutes, nothing happened. That was worse than shouting. Then Talia smelled lamp oil. She turned toward the rear door just as a thin ribbon of smoke rose beyond the stable roof. "The barn!" Dawson caught her arm. "They want us outside." "The horses are inside. We can replace horses. Not before Helena." She pulled free and ran. The hay shed had already caught along one wall. Flames climbed through the dry boards, bright against the gray morning. Inside the barn, horses kicked their stalls, frightened by smoke. Talia wrapped her scarf across her mouth and entered through the side door. Dawson followed, firing one warning shot toward a rider near the rear fence. The man ducked behind the trough. Talia opened the far stall doors one after another. "Easy," she called. "Come on, move." The mare Dawson favored bolted into the yard. 2 geldings followed. A lantern crashed near the haystack. Fire rolled upward. Talia dragged wet blankets from the wash line and beat at the flames, while Dawson covered the doorway. A shot broke across the yard. Dawson staggered. His rifle slipped from one hand. Talia saw the dark tear across his shoulder and reached him before he fell. She pulled him behind the stone water trough as another shot struck wood above them. "Let me see." "It passed through the coat. You're bleeding." "So are most men who get shot." She cut the sleeve open with his pocket knife and pressed folded cloth against the wound. "Hold this." Dawson obeyed. For the first time since finding her beneath the snow, he had no choice but to let her take control. Hooves thundered from the eastern road. The Vale rancher appeared through the smoke with a rifle across his saddle. His arrival broke whatever courage remained among Simon's men. 3 riders fled toward the timber. The 4th lay near the barn, his leg trapped beneath his fallen horse. Dawson moved toward him, but Talia reached the man first. He flinched when she knelt. "You ought to leave me." "You may answer for what you did," she said, opening her medical roll. "You will not die before you do." She bound his leg while Dawson watched the tree line. The wounded rider's resistance slowly gave way. "Simon's already in Helena," he muttered, "filed a will naming himself administrator, paid a clerk and found a witness willing to swear your father signed it." Talia's hands stopped. "When?" "3 days ago. Once the transfer goes through, you show up with those papers. They'll call you the thief." He swallowed. 2 people know the truth. An old servant who saw Josiah sign, Elias Boone, the bookkeeper. He kept Simon's payments. That afternoon, with the fire out and smoke hanging over the snow, Dawson began packing the wagon. His wounded shoulder had stiffened, but he worked one-handed. "You are not crossing the mountains like that," Talia said. Dawson tightened a saddle strap with his teeth and good hand. "You didn't ask the storm whether it was safe before you survived it." This time she did smile, though fear remained in her eyes. They marked a route away from the main stage road, hid the will inside Dawson's old medical case, and left Clay Ranch in the Vale rancher's care. That night, they sat on the porch beneath the smoke-darkened sky. "I expect nothing from you after Helena," Dawson said. Talia looked at his bandaged shoulder, then at the hands that had carried her from the snow, and never once reached for what she had not offered. "You think this is gratitude? I think you were wounded and afraid when you came here. I won't choose your feelings for you." She placed her hand over his. "I know the difference between owing a man and choosing him." Then she leaned forward and kissed him, slowly, without fear. At dawn, they turned the wagon toward Helena. By midday, they reached the first frozen river. The ice cracked beneath Talia's boots. Black water opened below her, and Dawson's wounded arm was the only thing holding her above the current. "Don't fight it," he said through clenched teeth. "Find the edge with your other foot." The river tugged at her skirt. Cold drove through the leather of her boot and climbed her leg like a living thing. Dawson braced the rope around a cottonwood root on the bank. Blood had begun to darken the bandage beneath his coat. "Talia, look at me." She did. "Can you stand?" Her breath came hard, but she nodded. He did not drag her across. He held the rope tight while she found the ice, pulled one knee onto it, then pushed herself upright. The final steps were hers. On the far bank, she dropped beside him and pressed both hands against his shoulder. "You tore it open." We crossed. "That was not my question." A faint smile touched his mouth. "No, ma'am." They reached an abandoned survey cabin after dark. The place held one bunk, a rusted stove, and a table scarred by compass points and knife marks. Talia boiled water in a dented coffee pot, cut away Dawson's bandage, and cleaned the wound while snow tapped lightly against the roof. He watched her hands. "They'll call this place nothing once we reach Helena," he said. "A poor ranch, a winter shelter, something you survived on your way back to your real life." Talia tied the fresh bandage. "Clay Ranch was the first place I stopped measuring every door by how fast I could escape through it." Dawson looked away. From his coat pocket, he removed a small wooden comb, carved with a simple leaf pattern. "Your other one broke." She turned it slowly in her hand. "You bought this in Copper Creek." He nodded. Before either of them had spoken of love, he had imagined her needing something there tomorrow. By the 4th evening, Helena appeared beyond the hills, its roofs dark beneath chimney smoke and the territorial buildings catching the last light. At the sheriff's office, Talia laid the original will on a walnut desk. Sheriff Amos Bell read it carefully. "Simon Reed says you stole these papers," he said. "Claims grief made you confused. Says Mr. Clay took advantage of your condition." Dawson's jaw hardened. Talia answered first. "My uncle removed an axle pin from my carriage and sent men to recover this will." The sheriff folded his hands. "I can investigate an attack. A probate judge decides inheritance. The door opened behind them. Simon Reed entered wearing a black wool coat and mourning band. He looked tired, respectable, almost gentle. "Talia," he said, "you've frightened everyone." She did not turn toward him completely. "Have I? Come home. Give me the papers. We can forget the trouble this man caused." Dawson shifted once. Talia raised a hand without looking back. He stopped. "Shh. I will speak to you before the judge," she said. The preliminary hearing began the next morning. Simon presented an earlier will, a paid witness, and records naming him temporary administrator. His attorney described Talia as sheltered, emotional, and unfamiliar with business. Judge Horace Whitcomb gave her until the following afternoon to prove the final document was genuine. Dawson wanted to find the writers. Talia chose the estate. Under sheriff's escort, she crossed the Reed Gate before noon. The mansion stood exactly as she remembered it. Her father's portrait still hung in the hall. Her own room had been emptied. The older servant who had witnessed Josiah sign the will would not meet Talia's eyes. "Mr. Reed said my son would lose his place at the mill." "No one loses a home for telling the truth," Talia said. "Not while I still have a voice in this house." The woman began to cry. Elias Boone required more. The bookkeeper sat behind a locked office door with ledgers stacked around him. "I changed records," he admitted. "If I testify, I may go to prison." "If you stay silent," Talia said, "you remain part of what happened on that mountain." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached beneath a loose floorboard and removed a thin black ledger. Inside were payments to hired writers, money given to a false witness, and a receipt for a replacement axle pin. One entry carried Simon's own instruction: recover the pouch at any cost. The probate courtroom was full the next day. Simon's attorney spoke of tradition, responsibility, and the burden of managing mills, land, workers, and livestock. Judge Whitcomb asked Simon about winter feed losses. Simon guessed. The judge asked about mill output, housing debts, water access, and outstanding contracts. Simon's answers grew shorter. Then the judge turned to Talia. She named the exact grain shortage from the previous season. She identified 3 workers Simon had dismissed. She corrected a false figure in the mill accounts and explained which irrigation channel would fail first if spring runoff came early. The room changed. The servant testified. Elias opened the ledger. A Helena clerk confirmed Josiah's seal matched the registry entry. Simon's witness began contradicting himself. At last, Simon stood. "I only protected what my brother built." Talia faced him. "You did not protect my father's work. You waited for him to die, then hunted his daughter for it." Simon lunged toward the table. Dawson stepped forward. Talia raised one hand. He stopped. She gathered the will against her chest before Simon could reach it. Sheriff Bell seized him. Judge Whitcomb declared the final will valid and recognized Talia Reed as lawful heir. The room filled with voices, boots, and scraping chairs. Talia turned toward the rear bench. Dawson's seat was empty. Outside, his wagon was gone. Fresh tracks led west through the dust. On the rail where he had tied his horse, Talia found her scarf folded neatly. Inside the leather pouch rested a sealed letter in Dawson's hand. She did not open it. Not yet. That evening, she returned to the Reed estate as its lawful owner. The old butler opened the grand front doors. Talia stepped into the silent hall, looked at the polished floors, the chandeliers, and her father's portrait above the stairs. Then she whispered, "This isn't home." The words faded into the great hall. No one answered. The old butler stood near the door with his hat in both hands. A maid paused beside the staircase, her eyes lowered. Somewhere deeper in the house, a clock counted the seconds with a dry, hollow tick. Talia climbed the stairs alone. Her father's study remained almost untouched. His coat still hung from the brass hook beside the window. A half-finished list of mill repairs rested beneath a paperweight. On the desk stood a photograph of Josiah and Talia at a harvest festival, both of them smiling into bright autumn sun. She sat in his chair. For a while, she let herself grieve. Then she opened the ledgers. The following weeks were filled with work. Talia restored the men Simon had dismissed from the mills. She canceled contracts that took rent from workers before wages were paid. The older servant's son kept his position and his family's cottage. Elias Boone turned over every hidden record to Sheriff Bell. Talia did not excuse what he had done, but she asked the court to consider that he had finally told the truth. In a small brick building near the East Mill, she reopened the medical room her father once supported. New shelves went up, clean bandages filled the cabinet. A cast-iron stove was repaired before the last cold nights of the season. She hired an experienced manager and required every payment to be entered twice, once in the estate book and once in the mill office. Nothing would ever again depend on one man's honesty. Each evening, servants lit the chandeliers. Fine meals arrived beneath silver covers. Still, Talia remembered onion and potato soup in 2 plain bowls. She remembered Dawson's boots near the hearth and the second mug waiting beside the stove before she woke. The sealed letter remained in her leather pouch. She did not open it until the estate accounts balanced. The workers were protected, and every paper carried her own signature. One quiet night, she placed Dawson's wooden comb beside her father's photograph and broke the seal. The paper smelled faintly of wood smoke. Talia, if you are reading this, then you stood where they meant to keep you from standing. You made me remember what morning was for. Before you came, I worked because the day required it. After you came, I began looking toward the door. I will not ask you to choose a poor ranch because I carried you out of the snow. Gratitude is not love, and safety should never become another debt. You belong to your own life now. If that life ever brings you west again, the fire will be lit. Dawson Talia read the letter twice. Then she pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. He had not left because he believed she belonged among chandeliers. He had left so that, for once, no man would be standing close enough to influence her choice. By morning, she had made arrangements. The Reed estate would remain under her control. The mills would fund the medical room and worker housing. Reports would be delivered to her wherever she lived. She packed her father's photograph, Dawson's letter, the wooden comb, a plain cotton dress, and a locked case containing the estate papers. She also packed medicine for Copper Creek. At the front door, the old butler asked where she was going. Talia looked west. I'm going where I chose my life. The road back to Montana no longer wore winter's white silence. Spring grass showed beside the wagon ruts. Creeks ran high with meltwater. At each station, Talia signed her full name without lowering her voice. She was not escaping. She was returning. Clay Ranch appeared near sunset. The barn had been repaired. New boards showed pale against the old wood. Smoke rose from the chimney in one straight line. Beside the stable, the apple tree had been pruned. Dawson had not cut it down. Talia climbed the porch and opened the door. He sat at the table with his sleeves rolled up, eating supper alone. 2 mugs stood beside the stove. Her folded blanket remained near the hearth. A length of sky-blue thread was wound around a nail above the workbench. The door creaked. Dawson looked up. For several seconds, neither moved. Talia stood dusty from the road, one hand resting on the leather pouch at her side. Simon has been charged, she said. The estate is secure. The workers kept their homes. My father's medical room is open again. Dawson rose slowly. He nodded, waiting. She saw it in his face. He thought she had come to close the story properly, to thank him, to return the comb, to leave with dignity. Talia looked around the room where she had first awakened beneath his blanket. Then she smiled. I came home. Dawson crossed the floor. His hand rose to her cheek, cautious even now. Her skin was warm beneath his palm. He closed his eyes for one brief moment. Then he stepped aside and pulled out her chair. "Sit down," he said. "Supper's still warm." The soup was onion and potato. Talia served him a second helping without asking. Afterward, they walked to the stable beneath a soft evening sky. The old apple tree had opened its first blossoms in 3 years. A breeze loosened one petal and laid it in Talia's hair. Dawson reached for it, then left it there. "I'll still oversee the estate," she said. "I'll travel when I have to. The medical fund will need me." "I know. I won't become smaller to fit this ranch." "I wouldn't ask you to." He looked at her, steady and unguarded. "I don't want a woman behind me, Talia. I want the woman who crossed a frozen river, faced a courtroom, and came back because she chose to." Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. Dawson held out his hand. "Stay beside me, for as many seasons as we get." Talia placed her hand in his. "Yes." Spring wind moved through the grass. Apple blossoms drifted around them, pale against the dark soil. Winter had once carried Talia unconscious into Dawson's arms. Now she stood awake beside him, with her name, her inheritance, and her future still her own. The fire inside Clay Ranch kept burning. This time, neither of them faced it alone. Maybe that's why this story stays with me long after the last page. It reminds me that love isn't always found in grand speeches or perfect moments. Sometimes it begins with a stranger who leaves your belongings untouched, waits outside your fear instead of forcing his way through it, and quietly keeps a place for you at the table. If you've ever carried a wound no one could see, if you've ever wondered whether you could trust again after being betrayed, perhaps you understand why Talia's return meant so much. She didn't come back because she needed saving. She came back because she was finally free to choose where her heart belonged. And Dawson's greatest gift wasn't rescuing her from the snow. It was loving her enough to let that choice be entirely her own. Maybe that's the kind of love worth waiting for. The kind that never asks you to become smaller, never turns kindness into a debt, and never mistakes holding on for belonging. If this journey touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what moment stayed with you the longest, and why? Thank you for spending this time with me on the old frontier. If stories of quiet courage, enduring love, second chances, and hidden mysteries speak to your heart, I hope you'll subscribe and join me again. There are many more trails waiting ahead, and somewhere beyond the next mountain, another unforgettable story is ready to be told.